Welcome to the final episode 10 Chronicles of UK Salafism, an Insider Perspective. And the focus on this occasion will be the year 1999, which will wrap up season one of these chronicles. I will begin by focusing on academic education in the UK and by extension the West, and start by mentioning the completion of my Masters of Business Administration in Education, MBA Ed, with the receipt of my certificate on the 22nd of February 1999. And the reason I've chosen this particular aspect to begin this podcast is because of the problems and challenges that the Salafi community was facing as it related to studying in mixed environments and universities up and down the country. The scholars and their students that had visited us had censured the participation and enrollment in universities due to the prohibition of free mixing. And this resulted in a significant number of students, male and female, dropping out of university. And the knock-on effect of this was the conflict that developed among various families and communities, because parents, non-Salafi parents predominantly, were at a loss to understand why their children would throw away something they themselves did not have the opportunity for when they first came to the UK. Also, they saw and considered that the Salafi students were throwing away their futures. And conflict ensued in this particular area, and also contradictions, because while we were being told it was impermissible to study in these institutions, we actually witnessed some students of knowledge and scholars either traveling to the UK or America to enroll in universities and embark on further studies there, or in addition to that, sending their own children from Muslim or Arab countries to enroll and embark upon further studies in these institutions, the very same institutions we were being told it's impermissible to study in. So this caused quite a lot of conflict throughout the 90s due to these contradictions and due to the damaging effects and damaging perceptions it had among communities who then looked at Salafi communities and Salafi adherents as extreme in, I would say, a behavioral sense, not an ideological sense, which I will elaborate upon towards the end of this particular podcast. This also created an environment within which individuals in the Salafi community started self-teaching and did not proceed in any field of academia whatsoever, not even religious education. And I say that because some of those who went to institutions abroad, like the Islamic University of Medina, for example, a significant number did not graduate, did not complete their course of study. Yet they returned to their respective communities in the UK and were heralded as some sort of leader or hero for studying in these institutions, albeit being short-termed or them failing. It also caused consternation amongst wider Salafi communities and non-Salafi communities because these uneducated entities began to judge and disparage others who had either academic acumen and had studied, or professional acumen, or were intellectually more astute, and they became a target of ridicule from these uneducated entities who would question their religiosity if it was not seen or perceived to be on a par to theirs due to the attire they wore, or to the number of ahadith they were able to quote or scholars they were able to reference. I won't mention or refer to Quran in this instance because this small entity of individuals were not conversant in Quranic memorization whatsoever, and their Arabic was rudimentary to say the least. So religious education was also problematical amongst many areas of the Salafi community because it was self-taught and it was actually abstract. And in this instance, I will elaborate upon what I mean by abstract by referring to the cognitive development model I developed in my PhD, where I've mentioned, the listener may recall, to stages 1 and 2, being the founding stage and the youthful idealistic stage. Throughout, I have highlighted that I very much in the 90s was at foundation stage 2, the youthful phase, which was idealistic. But this was an abstract understanding where we were taking lessons via cassettes, hearing from scholars and students abroad, taking their context of their societies, predominantly Muslim societies, and trying to place that within a Western context. And the reason this is a problem is because an abstract understanding alongside these first two developmental phases equates to an inability to contextualize and practice Islam properly within a Western society on a number of levels, education and employment being two stark examples. And when I talk about education, you only have to look at some of the Salafi community, of which I belong, where the level of education is not that much beyond secondary school. And you'll see a disparagement from individuals who have not proceeded beyond that to say education is not important. And I beg to differ, as I know what the scholars of Islam say, even in the contemporary age when they refer to the masters, the PhDs, the doctorates of other contemporaries to show that they are proficient in the field that they specialize in. So belittling of education, academic education, is something that was became prevalent amongst this small entity, this small but very vocal entity of Salafis up and down the country. So education was an issue and continued to be an issue with members of the Salafi community removing themselves from academia. And as I've mentioned earlier, the contradiction was there with the scholars themselves or some of their students and their children attending these very same institutions. Regarding employment, we also saw what I would call a ghettoization amongst communities because we would have the men saying that they're not going to go and work in a mixed environment because the same censorship that was taking place in academic institutions also applied in employment, that there were mixed environments, so therefore extended that you couldn't work in a mixed environment, which is virtually impossible to avoid within a Western context. However, there were individuals from the Salafi community, and I'm not restricting it only to the Salafi community, I dare say other communities have done likewise, but within the Salafi community, you would have individuals saying they're students of knowledge, sitting in the mosque, reading translated books, and becoming haughty with that perspective, whereas their wives or their sisters were then expected to receive government benefits and grants and the like, whilst their husbands, some of their husbands, a very small minority this refers to, I hasten to add, were proudly stating that they don't take government benefits, they don't work amongst a mixed environment, they're giving the dawah, which again, the latter was incorrect in itself. So from that perspective, employment was an issue for the Salafis. It was a challenge in that instance as well. I'd like to move to the organization that I formed when I returned to the UK, following the request of community members, following the request of Nelson Bakewell, the property agents for the local government who refused to continue with the sale of Brixton Mosque unless I returned, and following the appeal of the donors who had entrusted their finances to me without strings attached to complete the proceeds and the proceeds of that sale. Al Ansar Limited, as I mentioned in the previous episode, was a not-for-profit entity, and I've developed, particular strategies and frameworks within which the team could work professionally. So one of those was a timesheets in which they recorded their activities so that we could analyze the efficient or inefficient use of time and improve upon that. And I've taken that timesheet ethos from my time working in the legal profession in Holborn, and adapted it to the context of Al Ansar Limited. Now, I want to give some examples of how the timesheet made my colleagues a lot more proficient with time. Therefore, I think realizing, actualizing the importance of time as a Muslim and time management skills. So the timesheets were analyzed according to each month, the average hours worked, and how those hours were apportioned. And for example, after looking at my particular hours in October to December and a few other colleagues, I could highlight here in this podcast that November saw us working an average of 120 hours. In December, that reduced slightly to 114 hours. And the purpose of the timesheets, I will quote from one of the summary reports, was one, to provide proof of work completed by each member. Two, to serve as another method by which all members of staff can keep a better account of their time while doing Allah's work. Now, this was important because there was a culture that has continued to this day, that exists amongst Muslims when working for other Muslims. But we do not need to aspire to a higher level and standard and quality of work because the boss is a brother or a sister. And therefore, we saw in the 90s, particularly, and I dare say it continues to varying degrees now, where Muslims do not, some of the Muslims do not put in the required standard of work. However, if we're working within a non-Muslim context, we tend to focus a lot more and tend to put in more effort so that we don't get highlighted as being ineffective, inefficient, or end up being terminated in that instance. And these mechanisms I put in, I continue to do so in the various organizations that I work for, so that we can maintain that effectiveness, maintain that efficiency. Moving on from this, I've spoken about the academic elements here in education, the religious education aspects and challenges that were there, and the professional employment and development aspects. I want to touch upon some of my lectures now, and I won't go through each one as I have done previously, because there were a number in that year, 1999, 35 compared to 31, 25 of which had been delivered within the first 5 months of that year. But I want to just focus on a few of them before moving on to some more details, which I haven't previously elucidated upon in the other episodes. So on the 1st of January, I delivered a sermon in Brixton, Signs of the Hour. And the focus on this occasion at the beginning of this particular year was the forthcoming millennium celebrations for the year 2000. On the 7th of January, I was in Havering College and I delivered a lecture, What It Means to Be Muslim. And on the 8th of January, the following day, I gave a similar khutbah to that in Brixton at St. Bart's Hospital, Signs of the Hour. A number of sermons were given throughout virtually every week, but I want to move to the 17th of February, in which I gave a lecture at Southbank University. Again, it was focusing on the millennium, signs of the hour. But I want to refer to my comments in that my report at that time. And I had observed that the university, the Islamic Society, was struggling in getting speakers and those to support the work that they were doing. So much so that I was going to attend every week for the next 3 weeks to deliver lectures. So that showed that at the time, the speakers, those going and delivering lectures, were not as much prolific as they are today. That we were few and far between in that instance, especially those of us who were Salafis. And the Salafis were, I would argue, the most active throughout the 90s in countering elements like Hizb ut-Tahrir, who were also very active, Abdullah Faisal, and these individuals. But the Salafis were a lot more, I think, active than other groups at that time during that period. On the 18th of February 1999, I want to refer to the lecture that I gave in Oxford University and correct a minor error that I cited in the previous episode, where the lecture at Oxford I said was on the 18th of February 98, being a double lecture on that day, when in actuality, when I cross-referenced by looking at my actual lecture and compared it with my report notes, it was actually 1999 that I delivered this lecture, Who is This Man? And focused on the biography of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him. On the 20th of February, I was in West Thornton Community Centre, Croydon, where the sisters held a fundraising event for Iqra School, and the title on that occasion was Educating Our Children. On the 26th, a week later, I was in UMIST in Manchester and delivered a lecture, Signs of the Day of Judgment, again, that topic that was very popular during that year, and the attendees numbered 270 to 300. Proceeding forward, I'm skipping the amount of lectures that I gave, as I said, because there are a lot more pertinent areas and issues that I want to discuss during 1999 that will be coming very shortly. On the 23rd of March 1999, I delivered a lecture in Liverpool University, Is There a God? And 150 to 200 attendees were present, including 10 to 15 non-Muslims. And I made a note in my report that it would be preferable for someone like Abdurrahim Green, for example, to deliver this type of talk, because he's a lot more prepared for this type of discussion, having delivered them around the country and internationally before, whereas mine were more focused on other areas, even though I'd prepared for this one and delivered it quite satisfactorily. Moving through to May, there were lectures in and khutbahs, sermons in throughout April. But moving to the 14th of May, I delivered a particular sermon at Brixton Mosque entitled "The Humiliation of Muslims," and I want to quote from an introduction of that sermon to give the perspective of that particular address. And I cited from the Quran, chapter 30, the Romans, Surah Ar-Rum, verse 41. And the English rendition was, Evil has appeared on the land and sea because of what the hands of men have earned by oppression and evil deeds, that Allah may make them a part of, may make them taste a part of that which they have done, in order that they may return in repentance to Allah. So notice the initial address there, and I gave another prophetic narration about the Muslims becoming distracted with worldly life and things like this and not focusing on the hereafter. It wasn't that emotive address that we heard and would often hear from the extremists, where they would be calling and saying that the humiliation of the Muslims was because of the non-Muslims, solely because of the non-Muslims, and that we need to fight the physical jihad, that we need to go out and fight in this instance. Now, there's a context to that, but the import behind such a message by extremists was not the jihad as is known through the tenets of Islam. What they were calling jihad equated to terrorism, which is not jihad. So again, the focus of this particular sermon was about us looking inwardly at our own shortcomings as to why this has contributed to our own humiliation. Proceeding to the 19th of May, I delivered a subsequent lecture at a university, which surprisingly, I haven't got the venue recorded, but know it was a university due to it being the Racism Awareness Week. And the focus of this particular lecture was racism in the light of the Kosovo crisis. The Kosovo crisis had started in February 98, and it had ended shortly after this particular lecture on the 11th of June 1999, in which 1.2 to 1.4 Kosovo Albanians, Muslims, had been displaced due to the Serbs fighting the Kosovo Liberation Army. Tens of thousands were killed during this particular occasion. I will skip now some of my other lectures as I draw to a close around the lectures and sermons that I was giving, and refer to quite a momentous occasion on the 11th of August, which was the solar eclipse. And we attended Brixton Mosque, in which then Imam Ahmed Dahdo led the salah, led the prayer. And this was quite an exciting occasion for us because it was the first time that many of us had actually prayed an eclipse prayer of any kind. And it was also exciting because as we were heading to the mosque, we could see the non-Muslims gathering in parks with the necessary lenses so that they didn't look directly at the sun. And while they were doing that, we were juxtaposing and contrasting that we were going to a mosque to worship and to pray. And that was quite significant for us, many of us at time, especially as converts. I delivered the sermon after the prayer, and I remember that occasion when the day suddenly became still and dark, and it was quite an emotional and emotive occasion as the imam was reciting, and he became quite emotional on that occasion as well. The last sermon I want to refer to of that particular year, so we can move on to the other areas, was on the 24th of December, which corresponded to the 17th of Ramadan. And this sermon addressed the necessity of sacrifice and charity. And we were only a few days away from the huge millennium celebrations. So there was a lot of anticipation at that time. There was a lot of apprehension. There was a lot of excitement. I'm talking about internationally, globally, because of the new millennium approaching the year 2000. Abdurrahim delivered 21 lectures during 1999, some of which were in Ottawa, Canada again. And the exhibitions that my organization, Al Ansar, was scheduled to deliver in 1999 were in the University of Leeds between the 1st and 6th of February, University of Southampton, 22nd and 23rd of February, Loughborough University between the 1st to the 5th of March, University of North London between the 15th and the 19th of March, and the University of Cambridge between the 6th and 11th of June. Two visits from a local school, St. Saviour's, was arranged at our offices where they came to see the exhibitions on the 10th of February and the 8th of March. And then Roger Bolton Productions, who I mentioned previously, actually wrote to me in February, the 22nd of February 1999. And I'd like to read this letter to you as evidence of the outward engagement that not only we locally were doing, but Salafis were delivering up and down the country at the time. So, for example, he says here, he writes to me at Al Ansar, dear brother Baker, greetings and congratulations on getting the centre up and running. As a reminder of what it was like before the furniture was moved in, here is a VHS copy of the programme, The Mission, that we made with you last summer. As you know, VHS was the vogue at that time. It seems a long time ago, but yes, VHS recorder, a cassette was what was the available medium at the time. Continuing, it has been regarded as the best in the series, and although it was a tough day's shoot, I hope you feel it was all worth it. It all sounds a marvelous project, and I'm glad we were able to draw attention to it. It was unfortunate we couldn't get access to the outreach work, but I understand the concern from the mosque members and was very grateful for all the efforts you put in our behalf. Hope all is well with you and the friends we made during filming. With all the best, Nick Stewart, producer, The Mission, from Roger Bolton Productions. And again, I think it necessary to read that to show that there wasn't necessarily an insular approach. Yes, there were colleagues who were reluctant to show the outreach work they were doing, and that was understandable. However, there continued to be an element of withdrawal and restraint from members of the community, even post 9/11, even post 7/7. And this has continued up until 2019. You'll see elements amongst the Salafi community who like to sit amongst the shadows and always comment and always give their tuppence worth, as we say, always give their advice behind the scenes. And some of them actually relish and enjoy when fellow colleagues are face criticism, whether it be from the extremists, whether it be from other Salafi entities that they are having dispute or conflict with. And this is an unfortunate scenario. I'm not saying it's restricted to the Salafi community. However, this was some of the things that were taking place and continue to take place now. Now, moving on to the next stage, which is very, very significant, is that I previously mentioned the emergence for the first time in the West of a cult, the Salafi publications cult, who continue today. And it's very interesting to note that from the outward engagement that was taking place throughout the 90s, as this cult grew, they drew and pulled the attention of fellow Salafis inwardly, and inward disputes began to plague the Salafi movement in the West. So much so that the focus and attention on wider non-Muslim communities, wider society, became secondary, if secondary at all. And this was problematic because we saw the evolution of former extremist entities. HT, when it was then banished or banned from the UK, became Al Muhajirun. And we saw something that we had not envisaged, with Omar Bakri declaring he and his movement and Anjem Chowdhury were now Salafis, which they weren't. We saw claims from Abu Hamza, Abu Qatada's followers, that they were Salafi. The only one who didn't espouse this view was Abdullah al Faisal, who had delivered lectures throughout the 90s, one of them infamous for its content, in making Salafi wives permissible to everyone else by declaring us to be infidels, non-Muslims, the devil's deception of the Saudi Salafis. So Faisal never espoused or stated that he was Salafi, but would say he is the true Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So in this diversion, many got caught out and became distracted because there was a browbeating and bullying from this cult, which has continued today, in which they would focus on fellow Salafis to denigrate, to disparage, and even deceive scholars that they were the only Salafis and everyone else was astray. And unfortunately, some scholars believe this. Those who are still with them have believed that narrative for the last 20 years, with the exception of Muhammad bin Hadi, who has now spoke out against them and they against him. And this was problematical because when we look historically at the Kharijite movement, the Khawarij, and their in their infancy, what they did, just like we see with ISIS today, just like we see with Al Qaeda, they ended up focusing and killing and slaughtering Muslims. That was their main focus. Yet they were talking about the far enemy, the near enemy, fighting the non-Muslims being the far enemy. But yet we will see, even with ISIS, they've killed more Muslims than the perception of non-Muslims non-Muslims causing casualties in Muslim and Arab lands. The latter has happened, and there is a serious issue with that, to which Salafis who remain focused and outward looking will continue to criticize Western governments for such slaughters and atrocities in that instance. But I've digressed a bit. I want to continue on another very serious local, national, and international effect that impacted the Salafi movement up until now, 2019. And the reverberations are still being felt today. And that was with regards to Abul Hassan al-Ma'rabi, Sulaimani at the time, his visit, arbitration, and drafting of an agreement between the disputing parties in the UK. And I want to spend some time elaborating on this, and I will also read the translation of the agreement and Sheikh Rabi' al-Madkhali's endorsement of it. So when Abul Hassan came to Brixton to attend our conference, there was excitement across the country from the Salafis because they had heard some of the sittings of Abul Hassan with Sheikh Al-Albani, and the insight and the intelligence and the compliments that had emanated from Sheikh Al-Albani and other scholars about Abul Hassan as a significant student of knowledge. When he visited Brixton and we sat with him, we then received a telephone call from Abu Ubaidah, Amir Bashir, who was a student from Medina. He didn't complete his studies either. And Brother Farouk. Farouk has since passed away, rahimahullah, and he's Farouk's sister or Farouk's brother-in-law was the administrator and coordinator for Al Ansar. They insisted on visiting Abul Hassan and came across London to meet him and basically gate crashed our meeting as we were explaining the program for the Return to Ilm conference that year. Now, he, upon listening to them, agreed that he would preside over their disputes, and they came and complained about Luton only. They didn't mention anything about Brixton, despite the fact that we weren't on level or pleasant terms, if you like. But Abul Hassan, after hearing from Luton, decided to place Brixton with Luton because he saw that we had a closer working relationship and there was that mutual respect between us as well as cooperation. Now, after he presided over a series of separate meetings, individual meetings with Birmingham, the Salafi Publications cult, and Brixton and Luton, he came to a conclusion on an agreement which I'll read shortly. Before I read the agreement, what actually took place is that he sat, prepared the agreement. He then contacted Sheikh Rabi' from the office of Brixton on the phone. Sheikh Salim Al Hilali was there with him in the room, as were some of us from the Brixton management. And then when they got Sheikh Rabi on the phone, they had him on loudspeaker, obviously, so that Sheikh Salim and Abul Hassan could hear him. They faxed the agreement that Abul Hassan had drafted. Now, Brixton's fax machine could not receive faxes at that time, so I offered to visit one of the Muslim businesses on the high road after calling them and obtaining their fax number for Sheikh Rabi'. I then went to that shop, Force Home Care, and waited for Sheikh Rabi's fax to come back to us because he read the agreement and he said he would write an endorsement and he would sign that endorsement as well. So I went to Force Home Care. The fax duly came. I took the fax, walked back within 2 minutes of receiving it to the mosque and gave it to Abul Hassan and Sheikh Salim, who was still on the phone to Sheikh Rabi'. They confirmed they had it and they read it out. Sheikh Rabi' said, yes, this is it. And with that, Abul Hassan, Sheikh Salim, Dr. Jibali, Faraz Farhat, who did graduate from Medina, from Tooting, we went into what would ordinarily be the sisters' musalla, but the sisters were in Iqra school next door for such conferences, so it was therefore empty. And the sides attended that meeting at the request of Abul Hassan. On that occasion, Abu Sufyan was quite vocal, and the little Arabic I knew, Abul Hassan became quite annoyed with him and told him to uskut wal ukhruj, which I understood means to be quiet and to leave. And I saw Abu Sufyan leave because of that directive from Abul Hassan. Abul Hassan then went on to, or continued to read out the agreement that he had drafted, and he read the endorsement and comments of Sheikh Rabi'. At that time, Abu Khadija did not attend that particular meeting, but Abul Hassan explained that Abu Khadija was traveling to Kuwait to see Sheikh Abu Anas, and he therefore asked to be excused, but that he would abide by and adhere to any conclusive agreement that Abul Hassan had placed upon us after listening to everyone. Abu Hakim was there, Murad al-Jazair, Amr Bashir was there. And then after this agreement was done and some of us were called to sign that agreement, we were then asked to go out to the conference congregation that were sitting because the conference was ongoing. And some disappeared. For example, Amr Bashir, you will hear in the subsequent tape in front of the conference attendees, Amr Bashir's name being called by Sheikh Salim, but he'd disappeared. Abu Hakim was there and gave a very superfluous speech, which was indicative of the fact that they did not like how the agreement had gone against them. Murad Jazair was called and did the same thing. I was called and other members of Brixton were called to speak, as was Abdul Qadir. Now, without any further ado, this is a longer session and it's important that I conclude this particular episode with this. and then I will go on to some final other rudimentary aspects of my learning and other international events that affected the world at that time. But this is very pivotal and needs to be read because many started doubting whether this agreement existed. We have um, the Arabic original, which was scanned, saved, and we have the translation. And the translation that I'm going to read was done by Farhat. Dr. Jibali did another translation when he returned to the US, but when you place both of them together, they're virtually identical. So Abul Hassan's points started with this. It's with the name of Allah, the most merciful, the bestower of mercy. Dar al Hadith at Ma'rib, Ubaidah Valley. Abul Hassan Mustafa bin Ismail as Sulaymani. Ma'rib, Republic of Yemen. Dated the 10th of the 5th, 1420 Hijri. Title: Ruling for resolving the disagreement among the Salafis in England. All praises to Allah, and that is sufficient to say, and peace and blessings be upon his chosen servants. Beginning. Verily, I have inspected the causes of dissension among Salafi brothers in England. I sat with both sides together and separately. I heard from each side what it disapproves from the other, and heard both sides' response in that regard. I concluded from the above that everyone is zealous to safeguard the truth and defend this blessed dawah, and I do not endorse any of them over what Allah knows of him. Yet, it is likely that misunderstanding would arise in regard to some issues, or judgmental mistakes would occur when implementing the principle of masaleh, benefits, and mafasid, harms. But whatever the case may be, this type of difference does not justify disunity and enmity, especially when everyone did what he did, thinking that by that he was defending the sunnah of the Prophet, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, even though his actions may sometimes belie that. From that, I summarize my ruling among them in the following 26 points. And in what follows, side one, this is in brackets, side one refers to brother Abu Khadija and those with him. Side two refers to brother Abdul Haq and those with him. Everyone should forsake his personal right for the sake of protecting the dawah and safeguarding its honor, because everyone has done some non-praiseworthy acts. Verily, it is from Allah that help is sought. It is binding upon all to fulfill the agreement that took place among them by way of Sheikh Ali al-Halabi and Sheikh Salim al-Hilali. May Allah protect them and lead their affairs to guidance, because the believers must fulfill their promises, provided that they are permissible in the Shar, Islam. As for side one, that's Abu Khadija's, accusing side two, mine, Abdul Haq's, and those who are with him, of leniency towards those differing with the Salafi dawah, side two, my side, must demonstrate clarity in the affairs of the dawah, in addition to gentleness and leniency. In their view, they did that, being lenient, in light of the scholars' advice to them. May Allah reward them for their good intention, yet there must be clarity in this matter. Side one, Abu Khadija's side, must change point number 17 in their dawah, because it conflicts with mercy and the established principles of Ahlus Sunnah. They, as well as the other side, must not write with regard to the dawah except that which the people of knowledge have written. If they must write something in that regard, I advise them to adopt what appears at the end of Al-Asala, of the Al-Asala journal. If they differ, all of them, both sides, must refer to the two sheikhs, Ali al-Halabi and Salim al-Hilali, because as far as I know, they are best acquainted with the affairs of dawah and its followers in this country. And this arbitration is necessary because most of the points of difference between the two sides classifies under as-siyasat ash-shari, the established Sharia procedure of dealing in regard to understanding the situation of dawah and its bearers, and in understanding the issue of giving precedence to the masaleh over the mafasid. No one from either of the two sides may referee any other scholar that could be unaware of the condition here, or may not encompass it as much as the two aforementioned sheikhs. By asking another scholar and taking his fatwa, one would spread fitna, tribulation, among his brothers. Any reference to other scholars should only be done by the two aforementioned sheikhs, may Allah protect them. The two sheikhs should not give to either of the two sides a fatwa on matters related to difference or leading to it, except after the two sides agree upon the phrasing of the question. That way, neither of the two sides would be able to possibly snatch a fatwa and use it to justify his end, claiming thereby to be following the people of knowledge, when the reality is not so. Verily, it is from Allah that help is sought. After presenting this ruling, it is not allowed for anyone from either side to post in his mosque or other places anything related to previous disputes, because that will renew the dissension, especially if this is done with inappropriate wording and its like. The administrative affairs in the mosques will remain as they are, unless the two sheikhs see a corruption in a particular administration. In the latter case, they will have the right to change it, after giving it advice and exerting whatever is in their capacity for correcting its affairs. A distinction must be made between the administrative issues that are specific to every mosque or locality and between the issues concerning knowledge, dawah, and manhaj. In regard to the first type, every locality would implement that which is appropriate for it, provided that it does not contradict the Islamic principles. In regard to the second type of issues, they should be referred to the two sheikhs. The issue of a Salafi's teaching in non-Salafi mosques comes under as-siyasat ash-sharia, in the established Sharia procedures of dealing in regard to evaluating the benefits over the harms, current and long term. This evaluation may only be done by the two sheikhs. If they approve it, then it is okay. Otherwise, it is not. Everyone must then submit to what they rule, allowing no chance for anyone, novice or premature, to say things to the contrary. All of the Salafi conferences in England, annual or otherwise, should be unified. The choice of the participating speakers should be done after consultation with the two sheikhs. Organising and preparing the work for a function should be done by all with love and mercy, unless the two sheikhs decide to the contrary, because they are the most knowledgeable about the benefit of a certain individual's participation or exclusion from the organisational work. Classification of people, in particular those working with us in this dawah, is not open to everyone. Rather, it is reserved for the two sheikhs. Ahl Sunnah here in England will convey their statements in that regard. Whoever disagrees with the statements of the two sheikhs and is qualified to do so should consult with them and not create confusion among the Salafi Muslims. This will eliminate the source of difference and prevent the cause of evil among the Salafis in a land whose condition is not hidden to anyone, particularly since I have not found anyone here qualified in Jah wa Ta'dil. It is not permissible to condemn anyone who accepts financial help given to the dawah, provided that it is not conditioned by terms that are contradictory to it and that it would not result in evil. The evaluation of this evil will be done by the two sheikhs, and it is not open to everyone. One does not seek from this dawah earning leadership or position among the people. Verily, whoever seeks to increase his followers or acquire worthless gains, Allah will surely expose him. And Allah the Mighty and Majestic says, what means, and know well that Allah knows what is in your own selves, so beware of him. Surah Al-Baqarah, ayat 235. When a person follows the advice of the two sheikhs with regards to abandoning an individual or reproaching him, the others should not condemn him because of that, but should rather support him as long as that agrees with the previous condition. Abu Ubaidah Amir Bashir must return the endowment of the masjid in Luton, which he took after Mahfouz's leaving the administration, because it is not permissible to change a waqf, an endowment. And Allah the Most Gracious and Most High says, so whoever changes it after hearing it, verily the sin is upon those who change it. If there are other specific monetary issues of dispute, their specific rulings must be sought with the two sheikhs as well. The Salafi dawah in England is for all. It should not be said that such and such a mosque is the only Salafi mosque and whoever does not come to it is not a Salafi. Whoever says that would be splitting up the ranks. This type of fatwa can only be given by the two sheikhs. None of the opponents to the true Salafiyah will be invited to give lectures or talks in the Salafi mosques. If that takes place without an invitation or approval of such a person's presence, the situation will be evaluated. in order to take action in light of the benefit and the harm. If there is a disagreement in this regard, it should be referred to the two sheikhs and their advice should be implemented. Also, the Salafis will not distribute the opponent's publications, again applying the aforementioned procedure. As is well known to the people of status, knowledge, abiding by judgment of a scholar who is well informed, ijtihad, about the current affairs and the Sharia proofs, and abandoning for the sake of the ijtihad of those who are not so, does not come under blameworthy taqleed, imitation. It is not permissible to condemn the intentions of our brothers, and none of them should be accused of spying or other things, except after referring to the two sheikhs. Furthermore, our dawah, all praise being for Allah, does not generally contain anything that would make us involve ourselves in this dangerous area. All praise being for Allah, our dawah is the same outwardly as it is inwardly, and its outside and inside are both based upon the Quran and the Sunnah as understood by the righteous predecessors. Calling the people to understand in politics and culture should be done in accordance with the guidelines of Ahl Sunnah, not according to the understanding of the people of fitna. Whoever wishes to speak about this subject must first clarify his intention, or else cease speaking, in order to prevent the likely evil, because prevention of evil and corruption takes precedence over seeking benefits. Last page now. Each individual must seek forgiveness from the others in regard to things which he has blemished his religion and dawah, such as backbiting, mocking, cursing, and so on, before the day comes when there will be no dinar nor dirham, but only good deeds and evil deeds for settlements. As for those individuals from both sides who are harsh or inflexible in their stands or who seek recognition, and they are very few inshallah, they must repent to Allah, may He be exalted and glorified. If they do not, the outcome will not be pleasant for them, unless Allah bestows His mercy upon them. It is everyone's obligation to accuse himself and avoid being excessive in praising it and seeking excuses for it. I remind all individuals of the covenant that they took upon themselves in regard to giving precedence to the welfare of the dawah over their own, and in regard to mending the rift and regathering the ties of brotherhood. Whoever opposes what is in this ruling would be opposing what I believe will bring the brothers in England closer to Allah and reunify them. Such individuals should be referred to the two sheikhs who will do whatever the religion calls for in their regard, even if it may lead to pronouncing a fatwa that all of the Salafis in this country will abandon and desert him. Verily, our dawah is not tied to individuals, and it is possible for it to carry on without so-and-so. And it has been said, the last form of treatment, is cauterization. If the two sheikhs give a fatwa in this regard, then any of the people of knowledge who has a link with the dawah here should support and reinforce their position. Their fatwa should be accepted, as one would accept a trustworthy person's report, and as is well known by Ahl Sunnah. This is the approach that we are able to propose, in order to block the chances of fitna. We do not have a prison for those who oppose us, nor do they receive from us salaries of which we would deprive them. And Allah, may He be exalted and glorified, says, and revere Allah as much as you can. This is what I have reached for bringing together the brothers, and all I seek is reformation as much as I can. Facilitating my affairs comes only from Allah. I put my trust in Him, and to Him I turn in repentance. If this is correct, it is by the facilitation of Allah. May He be exalted and glorified. And if it is other than that, I seek forgiveness from Allah for all that is not pleasing to Him. He is the most exalted and supreme. Verily, Allah is most high and wise. May Allah's abundant peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad, his family and his companions, written and adjudicated by Abul Hassan as-Sulaymani, who is in charge of Dar al-Hadith in Ma'rib in London on Sunday, the 10th of Jamad al-Ula, 1420 Hijri. I will now refer to the very short but precise endorsement of Sheikh Rabi' to this agreement. With the name of Allah, the most merciful, the bestower of mercy. All praises for Allah, and peace and blessings be upon His messenger and his family, companions, and whoever follows his guidance. Verily, I have inspected the ruling issued by our brother Abul Hassan as-Sulaymani concerning our Salafi brothers in England, which comprises of 27 sections. I wish for the two conflicting sides, whose affair has reached agreement and denunciation of differences and dissension, to adhere to what is in this ruling and agreement. In abiding by it, there is a great amount of good and prevention of dangerous evils. I thank Allah, then I thank Abul Hassan and our brother Salim al-Hilali, as well as the two sides between whom the agreement was made, for arriving at this blessed result. We implore to Allah that this will result in good fruits in the future. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad and his family and companions. Written by and signed Rabi' bin Hadi Umair al-Madkhali on the 11th of the 5th month, 1420 Hijri. And then it ends, representatives of the two sides, our signatures, and on one side is Abdul Haq Baker and Abdul Qadir Abu Sophia, and on the other side is Murad al-Jazairi and Amir Bashir. Witnessed by Salim bin Eid al-Hilali, Muhammad bin Mustafa al-Jibali, Abul Hatim al-Fadl. Translated by Faraz, reviewed and edited by Muhammad al-Jibali. This is the agreement in its entirety with the endorsement of Sheikh Rabi'. And the Maktaba cult, Salafi Publications cult, have since said, we never signed, we never signed. This was their boast. However, they clearly accepted the representatives who were there on their behalf. Abu Hakim was present there as well. And their representatives included Amir Bashir because, as I've said from the outset, he attended with Farouk to meet Abul Hassan to ask him to arbitrate in the affair. So it was the Salafi Publications cult who had asked for this arbitration process in the first place. And when it was deemed and perceived to go against them, they sought to nullify it. And they sent Murad al-Jazair, who was a signature on this, to Sheikh Rabi'. And it was after he visited Sheikh Rabi' that Sheikh Rabi' reneged on his endorsement and the agreement became nullified. It was rendered null and void. It could not be implemented after Sheikh Rabi' had withdrawn his endorsement, which was a surprise to many of us, including the Jordanian sheikhs. So when Abu Khadija and Abu Hakim and the others say, we didn't sign the agreement, the question has to be asked, you sent your representatives in the beginning in the form of Amir Bashir, who was a signatory on this, and you sent Murad al-Jazairi afterwards to go and implore Sheikh Rabi' to abandon his endorsement. They're both signatories on this document because they are representatives or were representatives of Salafi Publications cult. So this is the duplicity of these individuals. And I apologize for the length of this particular episode. I'm going to draw to a conclusion by referring now, as I've been doing, to the international events that took place. 7th of January, President Bill Clinton faced impeachment for trial in view of what transpired with Monica Lewinsky in '98. However, he was acquitted on the 12th of February. On the 20th of April, the Columbine High School massacre occurred where 13 people were killed and 24 injured. The two culprits subsequently committed suicide straight after that attack. Notice how on that occasion, there was no mention of domestic or global terrorism on that occasion. But when you contrast it with those Muslims who were involved in attacks on US soil, it was immediately targeted as being terrorism. On the 27th of May that year, the International Criminal Tribunal indicted Slobodan Milosevic, the Serbian, for war crimes against humanity due to the atrocities committed in Kosovo. And on the 12th of October that same year, the 6th billionth living human in the world was born. Now, I usually conclude with the studies I had embarked upon during that year. And I don't want to go into too much detail. I have a lot here, but I'm conscious of the time that this particular episode has taken. So I will mention that I've continued with my classes with Sheikh Ahmed Awais, Imam Barbahari Shar Sunnah. I've got handwritten notes for June and August, 17 pages there. When Abul Hassan was in Brixton during the between this arbitrary process. He delivered lectures, and he wasn't written off at that time. And we attended these lectures. He did lectures on the life of Ibn al-Qayyim, and I've got 18 pages of handwritten notes around that. He also delivered lessons on the Dawah of Ahl Sunnah. I've got 22 pages there. The manners of differing, 10 pages. Madarik al-Salihin, 4 pages. And I've got my other notes from Bulugh al-Maram with Sheikh Ahmed Awais, a number of pages written in my classes that were from September through to November, and I have 81 cassettes for those classes from Sheikh Ahmed Awais. And to conclude, I'm referring to the learning process to show that despite the distractions and this inward focus of us as Salafis to deal with the problems that were being posed by the Salafi publication cult as it was developing, we still were focused on personal development and instruction. It's important to state that our countering and combating non-violent extremism continued by us refuting and giving sermons against the extremists on that occasion. And it needs to be clear that when individuals ascribe themselves to Salafism, yet hold beliefs that are contrary, ideological beliefs that are contrary, for example, suicide bombings being permissible, dividing Tawhid al-Hakimiyya into a 4th category away from the existing 3 categories, wanton takfir, labeling Muslims as non-Muslims, and other established ideological deviations, they cannot ever belong to Salafism. So Omar Bakri, Anjum Chowdhury, Abdullah Al Faisal, Abu Qatada, Abu Hamza Al Misri, Osama bin Laden, despite their claims, have never espoused Salafism because of those previous beliefs and a host of others that show that they are ideologically positioned with the Khariji ideology, synonymous with the emergence of the Khawarij shortly after or towards the end of the Prophet Muhammad's peace and blessings be upon him's lifetime, and their growth during the companions. So they cannot and ever be Salafi in this instance. I will conclude by referring to a different type of extremism, which is not as severe as the ideological believers, extremism of the Takfiris, the Khariji individuals I've mentioned. And the behavioral extremism is that which we have witnessed from this Salafi publications cult, the Abu Khadijites. Even though they do not espouse non-violent or violent extremism, they have a behavioral paradigm in which they look inwardly at fellow Salafis to denigrate, and cast aspersions over in order to gain sole supremacy and ascendancy over the remaining Salafi movement in the UK. And they will continue to fail in this. And I will end on this note. Seeing some of the contradictions as well as the increasing issues that were developing and my own personal development, I believe I and some colleagues started to move from the youthful idealistic stage to the 3rd stage of my cognitive model, the adult stage. And I will conclude on this and hope that this season, these podcasts have been of benefit to those who were previously unaware of some of the developments throughout the 90s with the Salafi movement.